Come and listen to my story about a man named Jed. A poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. And then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude oil, that is black gold, Texas tea.
Okay, so I don't remember when exactly, but you and I had a conversation once about the arrangement that you and Grandpa had once you decided to farm together. But there was one thing that had to happen first, and that was that you had to decide that you were going to be a farmer. And I think you had a couple of options, and I was wondering if you feel like sharing. I know lots of people probably have wondered how you
Right.
came upon the idea, and I have to think there had to have been a little bit of pressure.
Yes, I guess you could say that my father groomed me for farming as I was growing up, because he involved me in a lot of the things that the various activities and operations of the farm, so that I knew how it worked and so on. And he also, I guess you'd say, influenced me to believe that living on a farm and in a small community was better than living in a city. And whether it was right or not, I don't know, but certainly there were advantages. And so that was kind of where it started from. And then a couple of the circumstances that were involved was the age difference between my father and myself, 44 years. So had I been the oldest in the family instead of the youngest, it would maybe have changed some of the things the way we did them. Him being that much older, he was pretty close to ready for retirement by the time I was ready to think about what I was going to do. And I didn't necessarily have 20 years to decide whether to take over the farm or not. Some people, had we been closer in age, I might have decided, okay, I'm going to work off the farm for a while. And then when my dad's ready to retire, then I'll come back and take it over. But that wasn't really an option, because he didn't have that many, I guess you'd say, independent years left where he would want to keep farming on his own. So I had to decide fairly quickly that that's what I was going to do.
That's interesting, because I hadn't really thought about the age difference and what that meant.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then the other things that came into it was, like in my university training, we were prepared in the sense that if there's going to be a transfer of farm from one generation to another, very often there's maybe more than one son involved, or maybe a son and a son-in-law, and there has to be some things that happen that are extra because of that. And had the age difference been less, then my dad would have needed to continue getting significant income off the farm for a number of years before he actually retired. So it could have been a partnership with either him and myself, or if there was a sibling, him and myself and a sibling. And that makes things a lot more complex. But we were at university, I was taken through the scenarios and the training that what you would need to do if you were going to go that route. And some of my classmates did that because they were in a different situation. But for us, it was relatively simple, because basically Grandpa just wanted to continue living on the farm and be involved, but he didn't want to continue to have all the responsibility for a lot of years ahead. So what kind of happened? Now, is this the point that you would like me to just keep expanding on it? Or?
Well, there's no real direction this has to go in any order, but what other options were there for you to choose from? Like, say if you weren't going to do farming, were you going to
Well,
be
I
an
would've-
engineer? Were you
I-
like, were there things that you were thinking about in your brain that you might have wanted to do?
Yeah, so like some of the other things I had considered was, you know, for instance, carpentry and engineer work. I suppose at that point I hadn't thought so much about the welding side of it, but probably the main direction would have been in the line of engineering. If I had done that, of course, then I would have had to be in university for another additional 3 years or so. And then I would have had to gone out in the workforce and kind of established myself and got ahead that way. And some of my grade 12 classmates did that, and it worked out for them. The thing that attracted me to the farm was that I liked to do so many different things. And if you narrowed yourself down to one field, such as engineering or, you know, a doctor or anything like that, you put all your efforts into that one direction, and you didn't have a chance to learn all the things you were interested in.
Was it a big decision for you?
Well, it was big in a sense, but in another way it wasn't, because again, I was, you know, the only son, and it wasn't as though if I left that a brother would be taking it over instead of me or anything like that. It was mainly the timing, and I did believe myself that it was a good place to live and to raise a family, and but I had never lived anywhere else or lived in other circumstances, so I suppose I didn't have all the reasons to think of other things that somebody else might have had.
Was mom sort of part of that factor as well?
She was part of the factor in that she had grown up on the farm, and she understood the way a farm worked, and you know, that kind of the things like you don't just work from 9 to 5 and then go and do what you want for the rest of the day. It's seasonal. When things are busy, you put your whole effort into it. But on the other hand, when you are not in the busiest part of the season, you maybe have more flexibility than a person on a salaried job, because you don't have solid hours that you have to keep for somebody else's benefit. You decide for yourself when you're going to work and how much. But mostly it's the circumstances that determine that for you. You mostly just work your butt off. But
Well, big picture. I mean, mom was in your life and you're probably envisioning a family coming, and you're the only boy, and you know how to
and of
farm,
course,
you went to university. I mean, there's a lot of things pointing to you doing that.
right. And you know, some of the decisions along that line had been made before your mother was part of my life too, because I didn't just start thinking that way in grade 12. I'd been thinking that way for a number of years, and I had pressure in grade 12 to do other things. My math teacher and my physics teacher, they said, "Oh, you should be doing more than that," because I was very good in those areas.
But you do get to apply physics and math in farming.
You do, yes.
So yeah, go ahead and expand. Like, what kind of an idea did you and Grandpa sort of lay out?
Well, to start with, Grandpa didn't have really very much land. He had a half section that we lived on, and the 80-acre piece over near where the hay slough and the dugout were over north, across the road, near Genthers over that way. And then when it looked like I was possibly going to be coming into the farm, the quarter section that was over by Bob Clausen's that had been farmed by Jack Booker, it came up for sale. In fact, it was rented out. Grandpa Booker rented it out to the Harms family. Dave Harms worked that for a while. And so then I guess Dad made it known to Grandpa Booker that he was interested in buying it, and so they worked out a deal on that. And So that came into the farming operation probably by the time I was maybe grade 8 or something like that. And so then when I started farming, kind of the decision was made that I would be able to farm that quarter section over by Claessens. And Grandpa owned all the machinery, and he provided quite a few of the things that I couldn't provide for myself. But I provided my labor into the farming operation to help with his part of it, so that we kind of did a trade there. I got the returns off the quarter section for the extra work that I was putting into helping with the whole farm. And that went on for a few years. And then 1965, he decided that it was time for him to back off and let me take ownership of the farm. So we worked out an arrangement, went to Farm Credit Corporation, which was the federal lending agency, and they had a program for young farmers to help get them started. And I was able to get a loan from them based on the land being used as collateral for the loan. And it was set up that I paid them back over actually 29 years at that time was
Wow.
and you sure can't do that anymore, but
Oh.
at that time that's what it was. And the interest rate was guaranteed for that length of time. And by today's standards, it wasn't maybe extremely attractive, but at that time it was. It was, I think, 5% on the first 20,000, and then 6.5 on the balance. It was over that. And so anyway, that's what we did. And so then I took ownership of the half section that we lived on and the quarter over by Claessens, and Grandpa kept the 80-acre section that was over by Gentzers. And he kept that because he wanted to still be officially a farmer. And so there were certain advantages to him. He didn't have to, he was able to live on the farm and still get certain benefits as a farmer by doing that. And so that continued on for quite a few years like that. And then at some point he decided that he maybe didn't need to have the 80 acres anymore. So then we worked out a deal that I took that over from him. And then we just had an arrangement that he could stay on the farm as long as he wanted to. And the other thing that was part of it was the bungalow that you were raised in and we lived in actually belonged to Grandpa, and I owned the big house that they lived in. And the thought was that instead of him moving to town, he would just switch houses and he'd live in the bungalow for his retirement. But it never got to that point.
I remember that was part of our discussion, and I thought to myself, did I remember that right? Because it really didn't turn out to come to fruition.
No, and not until they moved to Morden. That was after they moved to Morden, then we moved into the big house, and then we sold the bungalow to a couple from Manitou. Actually, they were from Saskatoon at the time, but he was from the Manitou district. And they came and used the house on the farm for about 3 or 4 years, 4 years, I guess. And then part of that agreement was that when we got to know that we were going to be selling the farm, we'd give him ample notice so he could find a place to move it to. It was Lovell was the last name. And do you remember having Lovell cousins in Manitou?
Not really.
Lori Lovell?
Maybe
Maybe not.
vaguely. The Lovels
anyway.
I know mostly are the ones that took piano lessons from Mom.
Okay, that's a different family.
That's a different family.
Right. But anyway, within our family tree, Grandma's brother Albert married a lady over in the Darlingford area, and they had 3 girls, Doreen, Jean, and Rita. And Jean, the middle girl, married Alan Lovell, and they lived in Manitou in a fairly big house right on the main street going down through there, kind of across from where the hall, the music or the dance hall was. And so then one of their daughters was the one that was involved in festival. I can't remember. She might have been about the same age as Karen or something like that.
Right.
And so anyway, it was his brother, Alan's brother, that bought the house on the farm. And then he moved it to Manitou once he knew that we were going to be selling the farm.
Mhm.
So anyway, that's just an off, kind of a diversion from the main story. But
One of the questions I always had in my mind was, again, comparing the aerial photo of the farm when Grandpa was farming before you were farming with him,
mhm.
and how it looked like quite a bit of an expanded, bigger operation when you were farming together, of course. But were there thoughts of that, the amount of land that Grandpa owned before you were going to be farming, wouldn't it be enough income for now to share between two households?
Well, yes, that is part of the thought. As soon as someone else joins, you got to have a little bigger, larger land base. So that came into the thinking back in the, before I was out of high school, when he bought the quarter section from Grandpa Booker, the one that was over by Clausen's. And the thought there was that, once that one was gone, then there wasn't any other land nearby that we'd have a chance to pick up. So
Well, you were pretty lucky to be able to get all that land that was right in close proximity, really.
it was good to have it joined up sort of like that. Yeah.
And when did Roy's land become available that was right near the elevator?
Okay. Roy retired in 1974. So that was the year that I took over that. And that was a smaller piece of land, 100 acres actually, which is not a quarter section. Quarter is 160. But it was, again, the location was good.
Yeah.
And it was good land. And we know that, Roy had been a good farmer. He'd looked after it well. And at that point, of course, there was no thought of owning the elevator.
No.
It was just that it was handy. It was close to our yard for hauling grain and for, all the things we needed to do. And Roy was, I think I maybe mentioned the way things were done back in those years. You didn't necessarily just go out and, take out a big loan and buy a chunk of land. Sometimes you worked out an arrangement with the seller so that you could pay them over a period of years. So that's what Roy and I did. I think I paid it over, I think it was less than 10 years, probably 5 years. I gave him so much a year plus the interest on it. And at the end of that time, then my agreement was fulfilled. And I had the title to the land. I actually owned the land, but I owed him according to our agreement. And we went through a lawyer and drew up the agreement so that it was legal. And if I remember right, Roy and Irma, they each kind of had their own separate identity in terms of business. So I think when I wrote out a check, I wrote it half to him and half to her.
Okay, so with Grandpa being older and getting closer to retirement, but still needing to expand on the amount of land so that you could both have enough money, did you ever wonder or worry or think that by the time he was out of the picture and not farming with you, that you would ever have too much land?
No, I never really thought that because on the average, farms were getting bigger all the time.
Yeah.
And so you really needed more acres to get enough income even for one family. No, that wasn't a concern.
Okay. The decision to have both houses on the same land was probably economically the way to go. Like you were probably sharing, I don't know, hydro and property taxes and maybe all kinds of things like that.
Yes, it was a bit of a tough decision in a way because the history of farm families living in the same yard close together hasn't always been successful. There are, what would you say, interpersonal things that happen, especially between, it can be fathers and sons or mothers and daughters or mother-in-laws, daughter-in-laws. There's any number of places where there can be friction develop. And So being too close together isn't always a good thing. And our economics professor at the university warned us very strongly about that. He said, whatever you do, do not live in the same yard as your parents.
Really? Because the economics of that would be the opposite,
Right, yeah.
like the numbers.
Yeah, but anyway, I believed that, I got along well enough with my parents that it wouldn't become a big problem. And of course, at that stage of my life, I really had no experience with what could happen between the lady I married and my parents. And
Yes.
we never had a really bad situation, but there were some frictions. And
Well, you see, you're getting along with your parents is quite a different thing than, well, and I think it's the mother-in-law thing that always gets the bad rap. It could actually be a different scenario, but like whenever
yes.
people say they don't get along with their mother-in-law, that's actually kind of understood around the world.
Well, yeah,
You
it's
know.
I guess more common, yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
But anyway, we managed to work those things out so they didn't become huge problems. And between my father and myself, the thing that was, I guess, good there was, even though we didn't always totally agree about what should be done or how it should be done, he just said, okay, you're the one that's operating the farm, you make the decision. And he didn't give me a lot of trouble about it, but I respected his wisdom. And whenever he made suggestions, well, I didn't just throw it out the window and say that's a bad idea. I would deeply think about it, and it often did affect my decision too.
Well, in hindsight, like who knows, that one row of evergreen trees just might not have been enough. You might needed to have done that shelter belt between the two houses that had 4 or 5 different rows of trees.
Right.
That would have made my shortcut more fun too. But I was going to say that as far as your working relationship with your dad, that would have had to have been pretty good because like I've always said this over and over, is that if people say, what's the secret to your happy marriage? Well, I would say for mine, we don't long distance drive and we don't try to put a barbecue together. So there are certain things that people know that they're just not gonna do well together. But like when I asked you about what was that like building the shed together with Rob and with Grandpa, you said, well, I don't know how it was for them because I was innovating the whole time, but building that with the 3 of you together, what was that like?
Well, I'm sure it was a bit frustrating for the other two, because there was a lot of times when I was innovating and making things to make the job easier. Like we started out digging the post holes by hand with a shovel, and it didn't take me long to get tired of that. And so,
I'm guessing that you and Grandpa probably had a pretty good relationship where it doesn't sound like he was being too controlling or anything.
no, he didn't try to be controlling.
Mm-hmm.
And at that stage again, you got to remember that he was already, by the time we were building the shed, he was 80.
Yes.
Or 81 or something like that. And I was making the plans and all the arrangements, and he was just there to drive some nails and to help in whatever way he could, and just to stay involved. He liked to be involved in what was going on.
Yeah. And he stayed on the farm until, I don't know, what do you think? Was
Well,
he 85?
He was actually 87 when they moved off. Well, almost 87. Yeah.
Wow.
It was 1985 when they moved to Morden.
That's a long time to remain there.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. And when I read Grandma's diaries, like he was busy doing stuff, and that's probably what just really made him super happy. I'd say to him sometimes, he'd say, it's a good day today. And I'd say, why is it a good day? And he'd say, well, because I'm on this side of the ground.
Right.
And when you get up okay, he says, you're grateful for that. And then you do stuff you want to do today. That's what he said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's true. And, that's part of our conversation often when we get together with other people who are our age or older. Well, at least we're looking at the grass from the right
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. So can you think of an example of something where, like, I would think that you guys both being kind of a jack of all trades, like Grandpa is, you are, Rob is, but you're all maybe a little different version of a jack of all trades, possibly. So
Oh, yes.
what strengths do you think Grandpa had that maybe you didn't have, or that you had that he didn't have, that made you work together well? Did he lack or something that you did, and did vice versa?
Well, he was probably less inclined to use newer technology or more advanced tools and that sort of thing. And I wouldn't say that was either a real advantage or disadvantage, but you know, what happens is you get to a certain point in life and you decide, I'm not that anxious to learn a whole bunch more new stuff. I just want to continue doing the things that I know how to do. And so at the stage he was at, well, he certainly didn't have any interest in computers or cell phones. Well, there was no cell phones then anyway.
No, not yet.
I was probably more detailed in a lot of ways, but on the other hand, he was probably a bit of a better organizer, especially of trying to organize other people, because he had done a lot of that. You know, he had worked in the community as part of many building and renovation bees, where there were a lot of people involved, and somebody had to make decisions and tell others what they maybe should be doing. And so, you know, himself and Ed Finley, and maybe not quite as much Ken. Ken was always involved, but he was a little more of the tag along little brother sort of thing. Everett Smith was another one who was always involved in those things. And so, you know, for instance, the community hall, which is still there, but hasn't been a hall for a long time. It actually one time was way down in the valley past Clausen's, right next to the river. Yeah. There was a fellow by the name of Herb Sims who had developed a park down there and built the hall, and they used to have dances down there. The old buildings that they had used in Snowflake had either burnt down or fallen down, and they needed a new hall. So he decided that it wasn't being used where it was, that it could be moved up. And I don't know, you know, whether the town bought it or how that was, but anyway, it was actually moved up and put into place in town. And actually, no, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there, because that was moved onto the location about where the, you know, where the telephone
trailer thing
is. It's kind of on a corner. That's where the hall was moved to. And the trailer didn't come along until quite a bit later. That's right. And it, at one point, it had a restaurant in it, and a dance hall, and I think it even had a pool room in there at one time.
Yeah, I think I heard that once. So with the time ticking down a little bit here, I'm sorry to say that.
Okay.
I just wanted the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, somebody said in passing once that Grandpa might have been a surgeon, and then that wasn't to be. So what more do you know about that?
Okay, I might have told you that. When he was still living in Ontario as a boy, that was one of his aspirations, was to become a surgeon. And then, of course, the fact that his dad broke his back, and it changed the whole dynamics of the family. That option kind of disappeared on him a bit. Certainly after they moved to Manitoba, well, that option really wasn't there anymore.
So how old was he though when his dad died?
He was quite young. He was 9 or 10.
So where would the idea come from that you might be a surgeon when you're that young? You know.
I don't know. Just
like,
I guess people start thinking ahead as to what they might like to do with their lives.
Wow. I was like the person in grade 12 or coming up on the end of grade 12 that gets asked, and I'm still like, I don't know.
Some girls, as they're they think they'll want to be a nurse, and
Mhm.
some guys might think, well, they want to be a carpenter, or they might want to be a truck driver. Boys play with trucks and cars and all that sort of thing. Well, they want to drive something.
Yeah, I had 2 classmates in grade 9 that knew they wanted to be an accountant. And I
Right.
was like, how the hell would you know that? You're in
Mhm.
grade 9 typing class, office procedures. Like,
Mhm.
anyway, it's some people, I guess they just know. Oh, the other thing I remember about Grandpa was that he wanted to go to war, but he had a fracture or something and he wasn't to go.
Right. He had he went for his medical, and he didn't pass the medical
Yeah.
because he had a broken, I don't know, arm or something, and when it mended, it hadn't mended perfectly, and so they screened him for all those things.
So you see, all these things could have just taken a different path.
And that would have been, of course, the First World War. That would have been back,
Yeah.
in 1913 or 14 or something like that.
So had Grandpa been a surgeon, everything would have been different for you. If,
Oh, well, I wouldn't have been.
well, how do you know?
Because he would have not
Oh,
met the
right.
same people, and
Yeah. He wouldn't even have been in the geography to meet grammar.
Right.
There would have been no family farm that we know. And if you had taken a different path, it would have changed. And if Grandpa had gone to war, that could have all been different.
yeah,
All
so
of
many things affect our lives. Yes.
Well, anyway, it's probably pretty lucky that you got to farm all those years with your dad.
Yes, that was, it was a good experience. I don't have regrets. Like, if I have any regrets, it's just that I didn't get to branch out into some of those other areas that I might have. But
The retirement things that I think he did was he liked to mow the lawn on his little half-mile-an-hour mower, and he played pool. Like he did retirement things, kind
he
of.
did, yeah, in his own way.
Yeah, and I hope you're doing that now.
Well, I hope so. And it's certainly in a much different way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Mine is slanted more towards music.
Well, you said you were going to play more pool anyway. Is that happening?
Well, it hasn't got going yet.
Well, you
So
gotta, time's a waste in there, mister.
I'll give it the right opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I got to brush up on my game before we play again, or I'm gonna get sent up the river again.
Now it's time to say goodbye to Jed and all his kin. And they would like to thank you folks for kindly dropping in. You're all invited back next week to this locality to have a heaping helping of their hospitality. Hillbilly, that is. Set a spell. Take your shoes off. Y'all come back now. Here?